Do you love freedom? Do you love being clean? Then you'll love Hero Soap Company, made in the USA. Chemical and fragrance free. A portion of each purchase donated to veteran and first responder charities. Initial subscription purchase is matched bar for bar and sent overseas to deploy troops. Let freedom clean. Hero Soap Company.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight, my guest is Nathaniel Gillis. Before I bring him on, I want to thank C60 Purple Power. You have heard me talk about the amazing benefits that I've personally experienced, and you need to try it for yourself. Who doesn't want more energy, better sleep, less aches and pains? And it eliminates free radicals. It'll detox those nasty heavy metals from your body. Go check it out from yourself. Just click the link in the description or visit c60purplepower.com and use coupon code knowledge10 and you get 10% off your order plus free shipping. Also, we know YouTube is purging any channel they consider conspiratorial, harmful, or even just goes against their narrative. And this channel may very well be next. Be sure and subscribe on lbry.com. That's library.com. All of our content is already there, and you can find it right now. Just subscribe for free. Also, if you make a donation to Forbidden Knowledge News to help with our relocation, any donation over $10 or more, you will get 3 months free to our premium site. Any donation of $25 or more, and you're going to get a copy of Cory Hughes' upcoming book about the JFK assassination. All those links are in the description, and if you've already donated, I want to thank you so very much for doing so. Tonight, I want to welcome Nathaniel Gillis. He is a religious demonologist and author. After living in a haunted house, he spent 20 years researching what it was he encountered. He is the founder of the preternatural epiphenomenal philosophy. He has sought to redefine the nature of the haunting phenomena, ghost, and high strangeness. He's often quoted for his concept of the demonic. The reason they are playing by different rules is because they are playing a different game. Nathaniel, welcome. How are you tonight?
It's good to be here. I'm doing very well. Very well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I've been looking forward to this. This is very fascinating. My show is all about exploring the nature of reality. And part of this for me is understanding that there is so much more to life than our physical and material lives, so much that we don't understand. And when it comes to the supernatural, the metaphysical, there are many layers. There's many more questions that I have, the more that I come to learn about it. And when it comes to things such as entities and what you might call demons, there's many different interpretations that some may have. And this will be a bit of our discussion tonight. But before we get too far, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about your background and what got you started down your path.
Well, I grew up in a haunted house. We moved in at 8 years old. I was 8 years old when we moved in, rather, and it was intense. You know, I saw my very first apparition at the actual open house. And so once we actually moved into the home, the haunting became more malevolent as the days went by. And so I saw shadow figures. I saw a smoky apparition that would kind of weave its way into my room at nighttime. So once I went through that, I didn't understand it. Obviously, I was terrified of it. But I wanted to have a better understanding and a better grasp of what it was I encountered. And so the older I got, the more enchanted with this whole subject I became. And so that's really where I began with all of this.
Now, as far as a demon goes, there's many different interpretations. I've spoken with many different researchers. and people about this. To you, what is your definition of a demon?
History's definition of a demon. First of all, the term demon is a migratory loan word that did not originate into our consciousness until the 1st century. Prior to that, demonic possession occurred, but they didn't call it a demon. They just called it an evil spirit. To be more specific, they called it an unclean spirit. An unclean spirit is not without definition. Words mean things. And so the term unclean spirit, tumarua, literally means a spirit that is being affected by what's called corpse pollution. This is very interesting. I'm writing a book right now. It's going to be out hopefully this weekend, called The Skin That Crawls. And in it, I discuss this narrative. But in addition to corpse pollution, which for those who are going to hear this interview, it's found in the book of Numbers, chapter 19 and 11. In addition to corpse pollution, there was what's called dead air, or air that can kill somebody. And that was essentially the idea that when a person died, the spirit would leave their body, and that spirit would carry the same smell of its corpse, and they called it unclean air. And so when you're looking through that passage in the Bible, you will encounter what's called the open vessel law. This is very interesting. The open vessel law essentially explained the fact that it wasn't just people that are in the home that can become compromised by corpse pollution. But once that spirit left, any vessel in the home that was actually open and vulnerable to it, even food, would also become equally as compromised from what they would call killing airs. Like if you go into China and research some of the Cantonese traditions, they have the same kind of philosophy going on. And so that's in the Old Testament, but the tradition of the unclean spirit emerged in a feverish fancy in the New Testament. And now we have what's called in the Greek, ekatharpneuma, which is unclean spirit, but that's where it originated. So far before any Greek even stepped foot into Jerusalem, right? Before we even had an understanding of what the Greek migratory loan word of demon is, we got to go way back into the late Iron Age and say, okay, hey guys, before anybody even thought about a demon, what did it originate as? Does it make sense?
Yes, exactly. Makes
So,
very well sense.
In conclusion, I guess, to that question, Numbers 19:11 is also the origin of the exorcistic rite in Catholicism. Now, I want to ask everybody a question. Why is it that these entities are more knowledgeable about their curse than we are about their cure?
Well,
Because they're responding to it, right?
I'd like you to expand on that a little bit when it comes to, you say, their curse and your cure. What do you mean by that?
Well, the antidote to corpse pollution was what's called sprinkling of holy water. It's the Catholic rite of exorcism. It's worked for millennia. The question is why? Why are they responding to something, right, that was only directly meant for people, humans, who were polluted by corpses, and then corpses, humans, who polluted them, right? So if they are responding to it, then there's only two possibilities. Either these are disincarnate spirits, or what we've been calling demonic possession is a completely different phenomenon altogether. Does it make sense?
Yes,
and we
it
can
does.
go. We can even go back into 735 BC. I mean, we can go many directions, but that's where my take on it is. I wanted to go to the root of it, because I think that if we can understand that it's afterlife phenomenon, then it's a game changer, at least in my book.
Now, when you look at, I guess, your biblical version, such as the Book of Enoch, and when they speak of the fallen angels and the Nephilim, what is your interpretation of this when it comes to demonology and any links that you can put together?
Yeah, well, I think, okay, so the Book of Enoch is very problematic because the legend of fallen angels marrying and mating with women is not exclusive to Semitic thought. And it's definitely not exclusive to the Book of Enoch. It's very interesting, right? So when you look at what's called comparative literature, you have different origins. You have different kinds of angels that fell. Matter of fact, there's one book that blames it on the women because the women were too beautiful. Then you have another, this literature, and someone else comes in here with a Sethite view, and oh my God, it's the sons of Seth. And all of this gets into a petri dish of traditions to where people like me and you have to pick things out. And then at the end of the day, we're left with one common thematic element, and that is this. We cannot explain how an angel would mate and could mate with a mortal. It doesn't make sense. Number one. That's number two. Number two, this is very interesting. The concept of fallen angel was foreign to people, especially the authors of the Bible in the Old Testament. It's called henotheism. Henotheism was the belief that we're going to worship many gods, but we're going to worship one God more. Once monotheism hit, there were no other gods, no other deities. You're an angel, you're not fallen. So when we understand that the term fallen angel, it didn't exist to them in their consciousness when they wrote those passages, then we have to go back and say, okay, according to the comparative literature and what's called comparative etymology, what were they really trying to describe? Okay, so for instance, one of the problems that they've always had was they cannot figure out how the Nephilim survived. They died, and then instantaneously, they're back again. How does that happen? It can't. It's not until we look at different, not just passages, but we look at the entire gamut, and we can see that this was not just women mating with angels. These angels were called watchers. Okay, that's in the Aramaic, it means they were the wakeful ones. Do angels sleep? No, right. So when you go into the comparative literature, you have different, what are called Neo-Assyrian texts, Babylonian texts, legends that are all in the cradle of civilized. Is this okay? Am I rambling?
Oh, no, go for it.
All right, this gets really cool, man. They're all nestled in the fertile soil of Mesopotamia. You have all these things that are just wrestling for our attention. One common thematic element that they have is this. They were never talking about semi-divine angels that fell. They were talking about ancestors who died and were elevated.
It's very interesting.
So, I can ramble on anymore, man. I can do whatever you want me to do. So just let me know. It's a fascinating subject.
No, I want to stick with the fallen angels for a minute because, according to, books like the Book of Enoch, their offspring were giants, and
right.
These were the Nephilim. And I'd like to get your take on that a little bit more, kind of expand on your thoughts on, how could these possibly be the demonic entities that we may be dealing with today, or are they not?
Well, they're describing afterlife phenomena. So I grew up in the Christian tradition, and I would encounter all these scholars, and I would ask them questions like, what? Do you believe that these demons are disembodied spirits? They would say, no, I believe in the Book of Enoch. Okay. Cheers to you, brother. You do believe, right, in disembodied spirits. The only difference is those people who believe that think that they're from that particular time frame, right? Does it make sense? So all in all, we're both describing the same event in history, and that event is that somewhere, somehow, we were privy to a moment where someone could die, literally die, and exist again, and then try to, possess someone for some form of life again. It doesn't make any sense. Number one, how did they get the seed? That was my number one question.
Right.
Number two, why would they teach metallurgy? Another good question. It wasn't until I discovered what idolatry was in the late Iron Age and what the purpose of idolatry was. That's when my mind exploded, and I took a seat. I just took a deep breath, and I said, oh my God. See, these entities first possessed idols And these entities, as far back as 735 BC, told us they would die. And they told us which entities or which statues they would possess. Okay, in the Katamua inscription, okay, let me back up and say this. In 2008, the University of Chicago sent a team of archaeologists to Turkey. It's called the Zincirli expedition. One day during the unearthing of different sarcophagi and vessels, they unearthed what's called the Katamua inscription. The Katamua inscription, again, was carbon dated back to 735 BC, a long time before we even knew, again, what a demon was or even knew what to call a demon. In this inscription, written in Aramaic, Katamua tells us, I'm going to die. And when I do, my soul is going to possess the stele. Now, for those who don't know, because I didn't either at one point, a stele is just a gravestone. It's just basically an inscription, either on rock or on metal that stands straight up, and it just, it details who died, who's buried, all that stuff. He wrote it. And here's what's fascinating, guys. He says, my soul is in a stele. That word soul is nefesh. That threw every Hebrew and Aramaic scholar for a loop because they know the Bible. And now we have a person who's dying and he's telling us what he's possessing afterwards. So somewhere in history, and I'm going to finish this thought, I promise. Somewhere in history, their victimology changed, it mutated. And then finally, with Laban in Genesis, it's very interesting. He goes out, and I'm not going to get very deep in this because it gets very dark quickly. He finds a victim, it's a boy. He creates what is called the ritual of teraphim. Teraphim's plural. It's not just an idol. It's not a figurine. It's a necromantic ritual where he goes, he kills someone, he takes metal. Hello, Katamua. Carves the name of an unclean spirit, Tumarua, in it, not a demon. It's that dead air that left the body in Numbers 19. Carves the name of an unclean spirit in it, puts it underneath the tongue. That spirit, I don't know if it's electromagnetic energy, I don't know yet, but somehow it gained access through penetration, begins to speak through that boy's mouth. At that moment, this disease of the demonic mutated. And then they stopped wanting to possess their own sarcophagi. Now they went into what I call the mortal portal, and it's terrifying. But that's a long story short.
No, well, I'd like to get into that because you're speaking of possession.
Right.
There is, different type of spiritual attachments that people could have. There's, which some might say demonic possession where they actually have to have exorcisms or the Catholic Church come in. I want you to talk about a little bit about the difference between some attachments, possession, and different things like that could possibly inhabit a human.
Well, it seems to me that these entities are not only ancient in belief, but many of them are ancient in belief system and in existence. So I'm looking at these entities in terms of necromancers, sorcerers of the nth degree. And so when we're dealing with attachments, we're dealing with what's called sympathetic magic. Sympathetic magic is simply something where they will recreate an image of you and affect you by affecting that image of you. And so when dealing with attachments, it's almost that they want you to believe in a version of yourself that doesn't exist. And they use that similarity, or they'll use that to affect who you really are. Let's go deeper. The idea of an attachment originated in the 16th century in what's called the age of the demoniac. When you look at what's called the Dybbuk, or some people call it the Dybbuk, whichever, who cares, whatever. when you look at the earliest pictorial tradition, it's a man with a staff who's walking, and he has a skeleton without wings, see, on his back, and that is an attachment. So the word debuk means to cling to. So the attachment, their mentality, it's always prepossession. That's an exterior entity. The reason it attaches to us is because it wants to hurt us. It can hurt us so that it can heal itself. That's how they operate. And so the stage of attachment is when it's conforming to the person. Possession is when it's already conformed to you, and now you're conforming to it. So much so that once it steps into your skin, it will think for you. So much so, man, that you will not even know who's thinking that thought. You'll believe it's you now, right? And then that's possession.
Now, are there certain people that are just more open to it, or does it depend on your lifestyle or things that you're dabbling with, or all of the above?
All the above. All of the above. And here's something that's very sinister as well. In the 17th century, we had a case of a debuk possession where a young man went to an apple orchard with his father, and he picked an apple, went to bed one night, had a really crazy, very, very violent dream where he was assaulted. Next day, he was possessed. Goes to the exorcist. The exorcist begins to interrogate. He's a Kabbalistic exorcist, so his tradition's different than that of the Vatican. Whatever, no less accurate, no less, valid, but it's different nonetheless. And so he's interrogating this entity, and the entity says, okay, here's my name. He says, okay, what led you into possessing this child, or, well, this boy? He says, well, I found him in an apple orchard. Now I'm going to take a sidestep and say this, that 99% of your possession cases are male and female. That's always been the data sample. There's always been a sexual aspect to it as well. Okay, go back into this real quick. So he's interrogating this entity, and he says, okay, his father took him to an apple orchard, and he said he picked an apple. And so, kind of confused, obviously, the exorcist goes, okay, like, what do you mean? Like, that has nothing to do with you. Like, this doesn't make sense. He said, no. He said, I committed my very first act of assault. Catch it, guys. He has a serial killer pathology. He revisits his crime scenes. He says that I committed my very first act of assault in that apple orchard under that tree. And his victimology didn't change, if you know what I mean. So to answer your question, it's a very interesting subject, but it's almost as if, number one, it could be anything. You could do a Ouija board session. You could try to do a spell on somebody. You could be, sometimes you could do something and you don't even know it. And that entity will groom these people into what's called consent. And I wish it was a yes or no question. It's bigger than that. I hope, you know what I mean? So it's very large.
Now, I've heard plenty of theories on the reasons why they may, especially like to inhabit our bodies, our fear, our energy, feeding off of us, different reasons like that. Is it your belief that they actually feed off of our fears and our energies and different feelings that we have?
I do believe that. And I also believe that they will use whatever fear that they know about us and whatever fear they feel from us, they will conform to that identity. And so it's not, I know in a lot of horror movies and pop culture, they say, okay, we have those movies where it's whatever you fear that entity will become. That's very true. These entities will use whatever voids in us, literally and figuratively, to help them stay alive. That's why Yahweh, the God of the Bible, he called these entities soul hunters. And they literally take pieces of us, pieces of our existence, pieces of our everything about us, and they take it and they place it on themselves. It's a form of self-preservation. And so Yahweh's thing with them in Ezekiel chapter 13, for the researchers out there, his thing was, listen, those who should die live. Those who should live die. And so what we're looking at, again, it's a form of self-preservation, but it's not fallen angels. These entities literally want to have a body, number one. Number two, they want to have a body that looks like them. And that's what happened in Genesis 6.
Now, do you think that they could have people that can go practically their whole lives with some sort of attachment attached to them?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Until that entity wants to stretch its legs and act. You know, it was Deborah Moffat with the entity case. It's very interesting as well. She had someone, I think it was a priest, that came in to help her. And I just want to give some insight to how these entities work. And this priest had a candle with him, I think it was, and they went upstairs in the attic. And this entity, he didn't want to possess anybody. He could have. He was powerful creature. But he decided to pull all of the dust out of the air, took insulation out of the wall, and then used that to form an image of itself. Now, that's because he wanted to be at one place at one time, and he wanted to be visible. Now going back to the idea of possession, they can stay dormant. You could look at them and not realize you're looking at a monster that looks like a man. And so when that entity that is dormant, when it wants to act, it's going to do exactly what that other entity did, right? It's going to step in the skin. It's going to bring its consciousness into one location at one place, at one time. When that happens, it's going to act. It can open its own door, right? So what is it really after? And so it's a very interesting subject. But yeah, that there are people like that, and God forbid they're ever activated.
Now, I'd like to get your thoughts on the realms that these entities exactly exist in. I believe that there's a complete spectrum just beyond our vision that exists at all times with all sorts of forms of life, lower forms and higher forms. What are your thoughts on how these exist or where these entities are existing?
The entities that possess people are in the realm of death. We know that because okay, let me back up and say this. We know that these entities are in the realm of death because of the offerings that they ask for. They're not horns and hooves. When you go back and do like there's a scholar named Gideon Beharich, and he talks about the different offerings that were given to the deceased. And people like Katamua even ask for certain offerings. And so when you go into the demons that ask for offerings, they're asking for the same things. That world, that dimension that they exist in, they have a very ancient belief system. Their currency's different. I'm pretty sure it's blood, it's life. That's why they did child sacrifices. But anyway, so it's ancient. It's like when they died, they didn't go to heaven, they didn't go to hell, they were stuck. And they learned a currency system. Yahweh refers to it. Okay? When he's talking to Nebuchadnezzar and the hand comes down and writes on the wall, Mene, Tekel Upharsin. Mene can mean, this is interesting, in Akkadian, it means souls. Interesting. And he's saying that I'm weighing not money, because that's what money was to them too, Mene, God of fortune. He's saying, I know the game here. This life is currency to them. And he's saying, I'm going to play the game as well. Your life will be currency to me. And so the world that they live in, they prefer firstborn children. The victimology, their victimology, and what's called victimology distribution in the 16th century, your possession cases, 99% of them were male and female. This is very interesting as well. They preferred babies first. This is data sample. Then it was young girls. Then it was young boys. Then it was virgins. Then it was adult women. Now, that is literally serial killer victimology. because we didn't know that, right? They did. So the world that they live in, literally the rules that they abide by, in order for modern demonologists to even understand them, we have to go back to what's called biblical antiquity and even beyond that. Does it make sense?
It does. Yeah, and I'd like you to explain a little bit if this is the same type of thing you're talking about, or if this is something different. A soul hunter.
Yeah.
What exactly is that?
It's a necromancer. That's what the Nephilim were. They were. Matter of fact, the Amorites, when they went into Canaan, they called them Zamzumim. Zamzumim, it's not a concrete term. It was literally the closest word they could come up with that sounds like the language these entities would use to communicate with each other. That's nuts. When I learned that, my mind kept going off, because it's a direct correlation to Isaiah 8:19, which is what? Their language was chirping and muttering and a buzzing sound. The prohibition against necromancers had a specific tag to it. The necromancers chirped, muttered, and buzzed. That's who they are. So these are soul hunters. They hunt souls, but they hunt a specific soul. They hunt what's called the interior soul. Now, in order for us to understand that, we have to understand that in history, especially antiquity, you had two kinds of souls. You had the internal and you had the external. The external soul was the body. We would call it a corpse. In Ezekiel 13, Yahweh calls them soul hunters because they would take the interior soul of a person, trap it, go and cut a piece of the external soul off of their victims, their corpse, like literally, and then they would sew it onto their own flesh. It was a form of skin grafting. Matter of fact, this is very interesting as well. If you go back to Leviticus and you go back to how the physicians used to perform this ritual of skin grafting, it was called skin attachment. It's the external soul. So again, possession mutated, right? I don't want just a body. I'm not transient. I'm not going to go out and get Aunt Lucy. I want a body that looks like my apparition. It's brilliant. They're intelligent, right? But they have a serial killer pathology. And I think that we've seen that in cases, and I won't go into that, but that's the question. Yeah, they're soul hunters.
So they have basically entities that will go for the internal soul and then some for external soul.
Right. They're the same ones. They would trap the internal soul. Now I'm going to paint a picture that's going to mirror everything we've known about UFO abduction. Is that cool?
It's excellent because I do a lot of shows on UFOs.
Sweet, man. It's a crazy subject, but it's there. So these soul hunters had a specific pathology. They would go into their victims' rooms at night. Okay. They would induce their victims into a sleep state. Then they would wait until what's called the Ba'ah soul, which the Ba'ah, again, remember in Numbers when the body that dies, the air leaves, all that stuff, that same imagery and terminology. Well, Yahweh says it like this. He says, those who hunt the souls to make them fly. They fly like birds and stuff. That's why necromancers chirp, whatever. Okay. But that was their pathology. They would induce someone into a sleep state. They would wait until that soul leaves their body. We would call it remote viewing. This is going to get very interesting. And then they would literally cut the cord, take that soul, chain it. I won't go down that direction, but they would trap that soul, and then they would cut pieces of flesh off of that victim. We've seen the same pathology and victimology in serial killers. Look at Ed Gein, Leatherface, the Beast of Jersey. He's recreating what's called basically artificial life. It's a social skin. It's possession. That's what they're after. And so Yahweh is describing these entities, but it's basically UFO abduction phenomenon. And we can go anywhere with that.
Yeah, because that's very interesting, because there are many people that are of the belief that, you know, aliens are demons, and that a lot of the UFO phenomenon, the abductions, it all is demonic. Now, I'm still agnostic to that. I'm doing my research on everything and very open-minded, but I'd like to get your further thoughts on this, because it is very interesting, the comparisons that people make when they are trying to make the argument that these are demonic beings, because a lot of the biblical stories you hear line up with some of the things you hear in ufology. We've had plenty of ancient texts that speak of the beings that come from the sky, the Anunnaki, things like this. So there are connections there.
There are. I think that there's two keys really to understand that portion of this phenomenon. First key is to realize that when I say that I believe they're demons, I'm not saying they're horns and hooves. I'm saying that, all of my research in the first century, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is I do believe they're disincarnate entities, 100%. Now, that's the first key. The second key is found in what's called the Apocryphon of John. It's a Coptic manuscript preserved, I think it was in the 4th century, by Egyptian monks. It details, it's fascinating. It gives us actually profound details on how these entities in Genesis 6 manifested. Again, we have to look at the footnotes of behavior. We have to look at what's called the behavioral analysis, because if it matches up, we have to say, okay, why are they valuing the same things? Why are they performing the same rituals? All that. So in the Apocryphon of John, it says that these entities in Genesis 6 didn't marry women. It says that they waited until these women's husbands, because they're married, they waited until the husband left or was separated from the woman physically. Then they showed up in the bedroom as the husband. Because remember how I told you, I said we couldn't figure out where they got the seed? It's very interesting. So they appeared as the husband, manipulated or moved the wife, into intercourse. The Apocryphon of John says that at the moment of conception, wink, wink, guys, they stared into the woman's eyes and then simultaneously reversed their apparition to what they really looked like. Time out. Right? A demon is not what its name is. It's what it believes in. What does it believe in? Well, this is the behavioral analysis. That's what's called an obstetric tradition. Obstetric is a reference to birthing rituals and fertility. What was the ritual that they were performing? Well, they believed that whatever the woman was looking at the moment of conception, that form, that shape, she will give birth to the material image of in her womb. We would call it genetics. To them, it's different. And so what were they trying to do, right? It's not just possession anymore. I'm wanting to recreate a body that looks like my apparition. Now, that's in Genesis 6. Let's go to Ezekiel 13. Yahweh says, basically, that these soul hunters have a priest among them. This is going to tie everything together for us. He says that these necromancers, you sew veils and different coverings on those of every stature. That's King James Version. Rip it up, throw it out the window. Just for a second. I'm not dogging King James. There's more revelation here. It's not of every stature. It's of the highest stature. They believed, again, this is a cult of ancestral, like necromancers, man. They believed that the taller you were, the more gifted you were at catching souls and at necromancy. Hence why they would create an apocalyptic species of evil who were giants. Hence why we have giants that are buried. We go in and we find sarcophagi and we can't find the bodies. They're here. There's always going to be a tall person in this whole cultish area of this research, but they're one and the same, but they're not horns and hooves.
Now, I want to get a little bit to the other side of this before we're going to run out of time. I want to talk about angelic beings and our beings of light or beings of God or good or whatever you want to call them, of a higher realm. Just tell us your thoughts on these beings and how they interact with us. I know that I've spoken with many people that have had personal interactions with benevolent angels and had great experiences, communicating with these beings. Could you talk a little bit about that?
For sure. Absolutely. They do exist. I think that they do exist. And what's unique about this is that whenever they've interacted with mankind, they would always appear as men. They would eat. They eat fish and bread, but then they would walk through a wall. Matter of fact, John the Revelator is very interesting. John the Revelator met an angel, and the angel literally tells him, "Don't bow down to me, stand up, for I too am but a man." That's the same thing Paul said, right? Don't bow down to me. I'm a fellow servant. I'm a man too. But I do believe they exist. Now, and they are semi-divine, but they're not divine in the sense of, oh, they're ancestors and all this stuff. These are entities that were created in prehistory, right? Like they're part of the primordial reality that God had. So they do exist, and they do help us war against these necromancers. For sure, I do believe that.
Very interesting. And the final question that I have for you tonight is, there are many people that are having more spiritual, paranormal, supernatural experiences, at least from what I'm hearing about based on my audience and people that I interview, a lot more strange experiences going on. And it seems that the veil seems to be thinning in some ways. A lot of things are coming to light, even in the materialistic world. And 2020 has been a phenomenal year when it comes to strangeness. So yeah, I'd like to get your thoughts on if you believe that there is something happening to where people are becoming more open to the spiritual side and the spirit world.
I do believe that there's a gross darkness that's overshadowing modernity. It's again, these entities are seeking any emptinesses within us. Possession was always the byproduct of self-abandonment. And so usually when people come to me with attachments or even feeling like there's an attachment, it's because they're not doing something they should, or they have not manifested in a way that they want to. And so when you're dealing with a lot of empaths, if they don't know who they're hurting for, they're just hurting. And so they'll self-medicate what they're called to manifest. And so you have people, especially in the lockdown, that are hurting, right? And so if someone were to ask me that, I would say, you know what, look at your dreams. What are your dreams like? Attachments aren't just, man, I have a negative emotion. Attachments will kill animals. Attachments will follow bloodlines. There's more to this than just, I had a headache the other day. I better go get holy water. Not to mock that. Obviously, I would never do that. But what I'm saying is it's more sophisticated, but there is a profound darkness. And if I were anybody who even thought that they had an attachment, I would end any kind of Ouija boards, get it out of the house. I would just focus on me, all my relationships. If there's any trauma that needs to be healed, do your best to heal it. They'll use, like I said before, they'll use any point of penetration to get inside of us. And so you have to understand which stage you're at. Are they conforming to you, or are you conforming to it? So again, long answer for a short question. My bad.
Well, to follow that up, I'd like to know if there is any ways that people might be able to also protect themselves from any of these entities.
Prayers, religious amulets. Those are very effective. They're very effective. So outside of that, like I said before, figure out what you want to do. Is there a part of you that's about to go into a new direction in your career, or is there something that you're doing that you don't want to do and you feel called to go in another direction? All of these, especially when you're in a period of transition. I had somebody that called me the other day and we did a session together. He's extremely successful. I mean, my God, huge success, but that's not really what he wants to do. And so that entity would use that moment of a stagnation, right? And so outside of religious amulets, prayers, focus on you. Focus on you. Write down your goals. Write down self-affirmations. Guard your thought life. If there's something that you think, man, that really sounded weird, that's unlike me, take it, write it down, reverse it. Reverse it. The ancient exorcists always said that the exorcistic rite was an antidote because it reversed the curse. But it carried, just like an antidote, it carried the curse in it as well. So when you take it, just reverse it and focus on that, and it'll work. I mean, those are what I recommend to everybody.
Now, since you mentioned exorcist, there's many beliefs that if one is possessed or they have an attachment, that you have to get an exorcism. That's the only way to get rid of this thing. And I've heard many different people say, no, there's plenty of ways you can get rid of attachments or even, evil spirits. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the former idea of the exorcistic rite, it comes from the Vatican. The Vatican says, okay, if it's possession, we're going to go in there, we're going to figure it out, throw holy water. Okay, that's fine. But truthfully, prior to the Vatican even getting hold of that exorcistic rite, we had exorcists in the 15th, 14th, 13th, 12th, 11th centuries who would say that throwing holy water was the last resort, right? It was always, I don't want to do this, because it was literally, they called it the banishment of an unwanted being. They didn't want to do that. That was the last resort. And so they would interrogate. Who are you? That's why what your name comes from, right? How'd you die? Why are you here? All that stuff. And so one of the things that I'm very fearful of is the fact that we may be creating repeat offenders because we don't understand the whole data sample of demonology. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I have one more question. Since you said this whole data sample.
Oh man, I'm going to keep asking. I'm kidding. Okay.
When you say a whole data sample of demonology, it makes me think that there are, the entities that you spoke of earlier, these fallen angels, and there must be so many other parasitic entities in these lower realms that are different, that you couldn't even define as demons, or even incarnate spirits. Was that something you'd say would be accurate?
In terms of what they are?
Correct.
Okay, so those entities on the lower level, it's not so much an existence, it's interest. Just like hell isn't spatial, it's about existence, right? And so the concept of a lower being, it's found also in the 16th century. You would have people that would be possessed, and they would say, okay, why are you here? And it wouldn't be a demon. It wouldn't be anybody that was malevolent. It would just say, hey, here's my body. Go bury me. And so they have their own interests. Once you bury me, I'll be gone. Or sometimes they would even solve their own murders. Can you imagine that? A demon? Here comes Beelzebub. Listen, here's my body. Here's the murder weapon. I want you to go solve my murder. And then he leaves and never comes back. The data sample has to be interpreted, right, with intellectual accountability. It's fascinating stuff, brother. I know, man.
It is very fascinating stuff. And Nathaniel, if there are people that are interested in finding out more about you, more about your work, anything like that, where can they go to do so?
Well, you go to my website, njgillis.com, and I have some of my research on there. I usually update my research every now and then on today's version of the research on the website. It's about the symbology that these entities use. It's very interesting and how they've been using it since prehistory. But you can find me on njgillis.com. You can find all of my past appearances, my future appearances. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook as Nathaniel J. Gillis. And that's where I'm at, brother.
Awesome. Very good. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Nathaniel. Till next time, everyone else, you have an excellent evening.